Great. Well, welcome everybody to the City of Oakland Objective Design Standards Community Workshop. Today we'll be focusing on citywide standards for residential multifamily developments ranging from 4 to 8 stories. As I mentioned, that this presentation will be recorded and posted on our website later, so that those who wasn't able to join us today can still see the workshop. So we estimate that this workshop will last approximately an hour and a half, depending on the pace of the discussion. And here you can see the agenda for today. We'll begin with a brief introductions of the city staff, and then we'll talk about main objectives and go over the group agreements before going to project process and details. Then we'll have an exercise that will help us understand how objective design standards are different from design guidelines. And then we'll dive into the actual standards and provide the opportunity for comment here. So before we go over the group agreements, I just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Ruslan Filipa. I'm a project manager for Objective Design Standards project, and I'm here with my co-workers from the City of Oakland Planning Department, Laura Kaminsky, Kelsey Hubbard, and Stephanie Skelton. If you wanted to say hello, you may.
Hey everybody, I'm Kelsey. I'm excited to be here with you tonight, and yeah, looking forward to this discussion. Laura, want to say hey?
Yeah, hi, Laura Kaminsky, Strategic Planning Manager. And Stephanie?
Hello, everyone. I'm Stephanie. I'll be taking notes this evening. Thank you so much for joining us.
Great. Thank you. And so we'll, just housekeeping rules. We will adhere to the following rules for this meeting. We ask people to raise your hand to speak and be brief if you see that many hands are raised already. One mic, one speaker. Please allow one person to speak at a time, and please mute yourself when you're not speaking. We ask you please hold questions until designated time for discussion, but also please feel free to use chat function at any time to comment or anything that's being said or add questions. If you're unable to speak up, we'll review those questions as we can, not immediately, but at least we'll have your comment in. And we would like to just treat each other with respect, of course, and we ask people who haven't contributed yet to step up and maybe step back sometimes to make room for others if you spoke many times. And we all assume good intentions and look for shared opportunities in this project. So in this section, I will provide a brief presentation on some objective design standards basics, and there will be an opportunity for questions and comments right after this section. So ODS basics, I think the main question is, why is Oakland undertaking this effort? We do to build more housing, high quality housing, and faster. We're also required to comply with adopted state and local legislation for by right ministerial approval of housing. This includes, but not limited to, projects that are 100% affordable, SB 35 projects, SB 684 projects. It's a new Senate bill for small sites, as well as the local projects that are located in S13 and S14 overlay zones. We'll mention what those are a little bit later, as well as others. Important to note here is that without objective design standards, the city has very few tools to ensure creation of high quality built environment that respects local context. Thus, we need ODS. It's not just Oakland. All cities are on the way or already have objective design standards on the books. We are also required to respond to the city council action requesting planning staff to study incentives that would increase creation of affordable housing. Also, we're required to comply with the recently adopted housing element. We have an action in that housing element requiring us to implement ODS. So just a few words about the existing design review process prior to ODS. It is often based on subjective guidelines. Discretionary design review, because of that, it can be unpredictable and resource intensive due to reliance on subjective guidelines that are open to interpretations. This process often results in a lengthy process and extended timelines because of staff comments and revisions, then causing a backlog in development applications. This can contribute to development delays and increases project costs, which harms historically burdened and vulnerable groups by slowing down the production of affordable housing, especially. It includes a public review process that can result in housing projects being blocked or delayed by groups or individuals based on subjective criteria, such as maintaining existing neighborhood character or any other subjective guidelines the city may have. So in contrast to that, design review based on objective design standards utilizes a simplified, transparent, and measurable checklist approach that eliminates the need for subjective evaluation. This approach results in quality housing projects that respect their surrounding and can be approved ministerially by right, which means no public hearings, leading to streamlined approval of projects. Approach provides certainty to housing developers that their projects will be approved if they meet ODS. It also assures neighbors that new buildings will meet basic design quality requirements. And that's where, of course, it's controlled by the standards, and that's where we need your help. It also speeds up the production of wide variety of housing and aids in affordability. So very important point here to emphasize how will ODS apply. At first, ODS will only apply to projects already undergoing the by right ministerial review pathways, including both state and local programs. So these projects must comply with ODS, and they include, the first bullet here is the state programs that include 100% affordable housing, SB 35 affordable housing, which not always have to be 100% affordable. As I mentioned, SB 684, a new Senate bill, AB 2162, supported housing, as well as other state required projects. And this list may grow in the future as the state adopts new programs, as well as local programs that we recently adopted as part of our code amendments and housing element, such as S13, Affordable Housing Combining Zone, and S14, Housing Sites Combining Zone, that require by right review. Then, as ODS are tested, their applicability will expand to other housing projects seeking streamlined approval. A request for exception from ODS and option for a regular discretionary design review for certain projects might also be provided. But these details are to be determined. We're still hashing out what types of projects will be able to receive that exception. So just briefly about the project process. The draft objective design standards that we are sharing today and the draft that we've shared, posted online already for public review 2 weeks ago, result from extensive process involving community engagement. We held several stakeholder and focus group meetings, as well as advisory group sessions to inform the drafting of these standards. Based on that feedback we received and internal interdepartmental work, we are now presenting the draft standards in the result. After this round of community engagement, we will consider all comments and suggestions and then prepare a hearing draft for the Planning Commission review. Design Review Committee and Planning Commission meetings will be held later this summer, and we aim to adopt these standards for 4 to 8 story buildings in late summer or fall 2024. But this is not the end of the project. We will also be developing standards for 1 to 3 story developments and 8+ story residential and mixed use buildings in the near future. And please stay tuned by signing up for updates on our website if you haven't already, to learn more about the additional engagement opportunities and how to contribute to this effort. So now we'll open up maybe for a few questions or comments relevant to the information that I just covered. And after that, we'll dive into the actual standards, and we'll do an interactive exercise with Kelsey. I see one hand so far. Kirk, please. And you're muted if you're speaking.
So this seems like it's primarily about the process. I guess there's 2 questions. The one I asked in the chat is, are the buildings you show so far buildings that you think comply with these proposed, this process when it gels? And I guess I'm curious about how it improves the quality of the buildings. A lot of that has to do with cost, et cetera. Thank you.
Sure. I'll attempt to answer. I think there are 2 portions of that. Some of the images we show, we select images. Now, it's really difficult, obviously, to select images on standards that haven't been implemented yet and haven't been built. So we try to, throughout the entire presentation, there'll be a lot of visuals, of course. They're all for illustrative purposes. We try to find the best image that illustrates a specific standard or portion of a standard. And you'll see that later, how we do that. We actually outline design elements that we are describing in the standards. But the buildings you saw so far, they're just local examples, recently built examples that we thought are appropriate, but they're again for illustrative purposes only. And second portion of the question about the standards, how they ensure quality of buildings. Of course, no set of standards can absolutely kind of define the building and create a high quality building, but what they can do is to kind of create a baseline of requirements and avoid very, bad buildings or very undesirable buildings that, for example, don't respect local context or don't fit in. So yeah, the standards, of course, attempt to increase that quality of built environment, but also using this cost-benefit analysis in a way to not overstep, like not require too many things from developers that then will make housing more expensive or creation of a building onerous and more expensive. So it's a balance, and we are today asking for kind of your inputs about how are we doing on that front. So I hope I answered. I see 2 more hands. Sorry, who was first? Nia Scott.
It's actually 2. Scott says. My question also kind of have 2 parts. One is, does the process allow for more green and sustainable building projects, or solely projects that support the uniform codes? And secondly, are the projects, and if so, do they allow for people who want to build those projects kind of get some waiver or exemptions? Is about how this is for affordable housing instead of just below market.
Oh, I think we lost you, but there was issue with connection. Was it just me, or but what I could gather, the question was about sustainability and affordability. Yes, standards pay attention to all those areas. Of course, we're, again, as I said, we're trying not to create standards that would sort of make buildings really expensive to build. At the same time, we are asking for sustainable, high quality, durable materials for ground floor, for example, that endure, and instead of keep repairing the ground floor, right? It's important to use sustainable materials that will increase the lifespan of the building and improve the environment. So if I haven't addressed this question fully, please feel free to maybe put details in the chat while I will go to Larry Mayers, please. I'm sorry, I'm having difficulties hearing you. We're unable to hear you. Maybe
Yeah,
it's...
I can't hear Larry either, so.
Larry, if you could put your question in the chat.
I'm actually wondering if Larry already did that. They asked, who are the stakeholders you referred to?
Stakeholders, we try to we invite a very wide range of participants to our focus groups that we held in the last couple of years. That includes local architects, developers, affordable housing developers. It includes local communities, just residents of Oakland. This included various neighborhood groups and nonprofits and other organizations that we did a thorough kind of outreach to all those people. Was that covered in the question? And of course, if you would like to review our notes from the previous stakeholder meetings. We have resources on our website. We have summaries that also include names of people and their organizations and so on. I see Kelsey put the link to our website in the chat. You can review that documentation. Okay, let's do one more question at this point because we have a lot to cover, and we'll have more opportunities. I see hand from Hannah.
Hi, yes, thanks. First, thank you guys for doing this and for organizing this meeting. It sounds like it's been a pretty extensive process so far. I just had one quick question on the process. As I think you guys are immersed in this, and I know there's like a overlapping webs of regulations and building codes. In going through the actual standards, it was hard for me as just a stakeholder to understand what was based on kind of mandated building codes and what was more kind of design that we as a community can have input into. I was wondering in a future draft revision if it would be possible to add kind of references of, this is mandated already by either, state or local code, and this is something that is more flexible.
Thank you so much for your question. It's actually an excellent question. For objective design standards, every standard you see is not a repeat from a code or a building code. We tried very hard to avoid those kind of conflicts. So every standard is up for review. Sometimes if you review the draft, you could see that, oh, this is required by Oakland Department of Transportation, and you have to comply with their, for example, encroachment requirements. We state that upfront without kind of repeating their standard that's already somewhere else. So we actually did a lot of work to make sure that whatever is in our zoning or planning code is not repeated or in conflict with what we are proposing in objective design standards. Standards meant to be replacement for the guidelines that we currently have. So we have a series of documents that guide development in Oakland, for example, 1 to 3 unit design guidelines, but that didn't apply here, or to some extent it did, but like we have corridor design guidelines. So the standards would be replacing those subjective guidelines.
Okay, that's super helpful. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Okay, well, maybe now we'll go to, let's see. So yeah, I'll pass it along to Kelsey. We'll do a fun exercise that will help us understand what are objective design standards actually. Kelsey, take it away.
Thanks, Ruslan. Hey, everybody. My name is Kelsey, and yes, I'm excited to talk about the difference between objective standards and subjective guidelines. As Ruslan mentioned, we're trying to move away from subjective guidelines as they do require interpretation and discretion from the planner, which can create delays in the approval process and just a backlog of projects. So yeah, this exercise here is really, I know we got a lot of different folks in the room as a community workshop, just different levels of understanding, expertise. So just kind of wanted to run this exercise, kind of discuss a little bit about the difference between objective standards and subjective guidelines. And then we're going to move to a quick little exercise to test out our knowledge. But yeah, as I mentioned, objective standards are measurable, verifiable, knowable, and they don't involve subjective judgment, while subjective guidelines are generally the opposite. They do require that interpretation and discretion. An example of an objective standard is only one curb cut shall be allowed if the street frontage is 200 feet or less. And kind of the opposite, the subjective guideline version of that would be limit curb cuts on the corridors. So you can kind of see how that requires interpretation and discretion, while the objective standard is very clear and it provides measurable, verifiable, knowable concrete kind of standard. The second example, no blank walls equal to 15 feet or longer should be allowed unless required by structural demands of a building. When avoidable, all blank walls should include treatments specified below. So that standard will continue on. And the subjective kind of version of that would be avoid large blank walls on the street facade of a building, provide visual interest when blank walls are unavoidable. So again, just kind of getting into that specificity and that measurable, verifiable, knowable, tangible aspects that we're integrating directly into the standards, objective standards, and moving away from those subjective guidelines. Next slide. So we're going to do a little Mentimeter exercise. I don't know if everyone is familiar, but if you could get out your smartphone or just open another tab in your web browser on your laptop here, and we want to go to www.mentimeter.com or menti, MENTI.com. And once you're there, we can input code 22579541. So I'm going to give everyone a couple seconds to get there, and please feel free to unmute yourself or put in the chat if you're kind of unsure, looking for some help. We're all in it together, and this is going to be fun. So once we're there, the slide on Mentimeter is just going to propose actually, Ruslan, I can start sharing my screen if you don't mind.
Sounds good. I'll stop.
Here. Okay, so we all should be looking at this, whether on our phones or on our laptops, and we have this first item where feasible, orient group open space towards living units or commercial space. And the question is, do you feel like this is an objective design standard or subjective design guideline? I can see 4 people down in the bottom right-hand corner already voted. We got a lot more than that. All right, 6 votes coming in. I have the responses hidden right now, so I don't want to tip anybody off one way or the other, but we'll give it a few seconds. We got 7 responses in. And if you're feeling uncomfortable with the Mentimeter, put your guess in the chat too. All right, we got 8 still coming along. This is our first one, 9. So we'll give it a few more seconds. And again, we're just thinking about, is this an objective design standard or a subjective design guideline? Hoping to really grasp that concept of the difference between the two. All right, we got 10 responses. I'll give it maybe 5 more seconds. We got a couple more examples we'll move through. So if you missed this one on the Mentimeter, it's all good. All right, so let's see. Oh, okay. So 2 folks thought that this was an objective design standard, while 8 folks thought this was a subjective design guideline. And the 8 folks are correct. This is a subjective design guideline. What this would look like as an objective design standard would be more like this. Group usable open space that is not located on rooftops shall be visible from at least one of the following, and provides those kind of 4 menu of options where the applicant will be able to choose at least one of the 4. So again, providing those measurable, verifiable, less subjective instructions. All right, let's go number 2 here. We got, when group usable open space is provided, include a minimum of one of the following amenities. And we have a list of options, and we're looking, is this a objective design guideline or objective design standard? Sorry, I knew that I was going to trip up on that. Or subjective design guideline. All right, we got 3 votes in. 4, we're climbing. 6, okay. 7. Again, feel free. I can't see the chat, but I know Steph, Laura, and Ruslan are checking it out. Maybe speak up if Anyone cast their vote there? We got 9. All right, 10. Let's see.
Kelsey, we have one vote from Chris Buckley, subjective.
All right, so Chris felt like this was subjective. We have 12 votes that felt like it was objective, and then I guess one more plus Chris, 2 votes, subjective design guidelines. This is indeed a objective design standard. Again, we
I
provided
wanted
that.
to say, sorry, Kelsey, I wanted to say that Christopher submitted his answer for the previous question, which was correct.
Okay. Thanks for that correction. All right, so we know what this would look as an objective design standard. The subjective design guideline would be more nebulous, more vague. Open space should be an integral feature of the site plan that promotes social interaction and organizes architecture of development. And again, you can kind of see how that's really kind of subjective. It's not providing clear, measurable, verifiable ways that we could really check off a list. So that's that difference there. All right, moving into the next one, establish a prominent and differentiated ground floor in residential buildings. How are folks feeling about this one? Got 3 votes in. Objective design standard, subjective design guideline. 9 votes. 11, all right, we're getting more participation. 12, here we go. All right, we'll do a little 5-second countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's see what folks thought. All right, subjective design guideline and 1 vote for objective design standard. So we're starting to get it. It is indeed a subjective design guideline, and the version of this that would be an objective design standard would be within the corridors, the minimum ground floor height for buildings containing street fronting ground floor residential uses shall be no less than 12 feet as measured from the sidewalk to the 2nd story floor. So again, we're adding that 12 feet. We're saying at what point it should be measured and providing those concrete details that really require no subjectivity at all. All right. Inching closer to the end. Here we are. To avoid a tacked-on look, occupied balconies that are at least 3 feet deep shall be recessed into the building facade by a minimum of 12 inches. So what tips can we look for that would clue us off that this is maybe objective design standard versus subjective design guideline? What are we looking for here? Got 11 people, 12 people that feel like they know the answer. Let's see. All right. We have 12 votes for objective design standard and 2 votes for subjective design guideline.
It was a trick question, I would say, because it has that tacked on in the beginning.
It does, yes. But maybe that's something that we can reflect on in our next draft. But it does also include those really measurable, verifiable, at least 3 feet deep by a minimum of 12 inches. So providing those. All right, and the subjective version of that would be integrate balconies into the design of the building, kind of giving no details one way or the other, what kind of this needs to look like or this should look like, no measurable, verifiable aspects to that, kind of just fully subjective and up for interpretation. All right, I believe this is the last one, bringing it home. Can we get everyone on the same page here? For building frontages that are greater than or equal to 300 feet in length, at least 2 massing breaks shall be provided from the following options. The options being minimum 5 feet wide and 2 feet deep, recess or projection, minimum 10 feet wide or 10 feet deep exterior court, minimum 10 feet wide entry point with a minimum vertical clearance of 12 feet. Hearing a lot of numbers in there. Could it be an objective design standard, subjective design guideline? We got 10 votes in. 11. I think we hit a max of 14. So let's see if we can get, I see 14 down there. All right, we'll give it 5 more seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's see what people thought. All right. objective design standard, we got 14 votes for that, and that is indeed correct. It is an objective design standard. The subjective design guideline version of this would be reduce the visual scale of large building frontage. Again, missing those measurable, verifiable aspects of what objective design standards are able to bring. So thanks for participating in that. I hope that was fun and maybe a little educational. We're really just trying or hoping that the group can grasp the difference between these two objective design standards, subjective design guidelines, and the way that they kind of take shape and inform our work and projects. So Ruslan, back to you. You're muted, sorry.
Oh, sorry about that. I was just saying thank you so much, Kelsey, for the fun exercise and the energy. I had fun. Let me share my screen again. Takes a few clicks every time. So let's dive into the standards, shall we? I did see a lot of comments and questions in the chat about some of the standards we featured already. There'll be repeats, and if not, we can come back to those comments a little bit later. So the full public draft of the objective design standards for 4 to 8 story residential multifamily developments has been shared a couple of weeks ago for public review. You can still review the document and comment on the draft by visiting the provided web address here on the slide. And also you can scan the QR code for convenience. The draft will be open for comments until the end of day on July 3rd. I'm sorry, on June 3rd. The draft is organized as a checklist. You can see a screenshot of that checklist here. And today we will focus on a selection of the standards from the full checklist. We unfortunately don't have time to go through every single standard. The following topics were emphasized by participants in previous community engagement activities conducted earlier in the project, and we hope to gain additional feedback from you today. These topics included things like massing breaks and building corners, blank walls, ground floor for both residential and commercial uses, roof lines, and windows. So we'll try to capture a lot of these standards today, but of course the full public draft has more. So I encourage you all to take a look. And we'll approach each standard that I'm going to start featuring in a minute in the same way. And there'll be 2 suggested questions applicable to each of these standards. Again, those are suggestions, and if people have other questions, that's of course fine. We can discuss that as well. But we would like to focus on what other options would you suggest? And are there any options that are difficult to implement or not desirable for whatever reason, and then why? This is our first kind of standard, and I will read.
Ruslan, I also just wanted to say, like, there will be an opportunity to comment on these exact standards additionally through a survey that we'll share at the end of this meeting as well. So if you need time to digest these and kind of reflect on them, that's absolutely fine. We'll be putting out a survey that has the exact questions, illustrative examples, and standards right after this workshop.
Thank you, Kelsey. Yeah, it's not the last opportunity, right? So we'll have, after this, exact repeat of what we went over today, that you can do at your own convenience, and of course the full draft comments. So I will read each standard and then ask the questions posted on the slide. Again, just to repeat, please raise your hand if you want to speak, and please use chat function if you want to respond, and we'll try to read the questions or comments after that. So we'll start from massing breaks. The currently proposed draft ODS offers the following options for building frontages and continuous street walls greater than or equal to 100 feet, but less than 300 feet in length. Massing breaks shall be provided by at least one of the following options. So it's only, the standard only requires one of these three one time. So first is a recess or projection in a building massing that is at least 5 feet wide and 2 feet deep, that extends the full length of the building from ground floor to the roof. And sorry, the top section of the building, if it's provided, including a break in the roof line. So here in the image one, you could see sort of, we try to find an appropriate image. They're not always the best, please keep in mind it's for illustrative purposes only, but a recess and massing like that would be appropriate. The second option is a portal. There's at least 10 feet wide and has a minimum vertical clearance of 12 feet. Fences are allowed at such portals if they comply with zoning. The full draft of objective design standards will have glossary where portal is defined, but I think it's easy to see what portal is from this image. And the third option is an exterior court that is a minimum of 10 by 10 feet, open to the sky, visually open to the street on at least one side. And this court could be a part of the setback required by the underlying zoning district. Again, fences are allowed if they comply with zoning. That means like 4 foot maximum or whatever we have in the zoning. And then note that this option is allowed on corridors only if other options on this list are not feasible. So just a caveat for buildings located on the corridor. So those three options. Yeah, curious to hear your responses or any thoughts. Anybody wants to react to the standard? If not, we can move on to the next one. I don't see any hands right now.
I see one from Brian.
Simple question. So this third option is available only if the other options are not feasible. How does one demonstrate that the other options are not feasible? What would that look like?
Yeah, we would require whoever does the submittal to explain, like if it's a site conditions, for example, physically precluding other options, or the building design that physically precludes a recess or projection. We do that because exterior courts like that aren't desirable along the corridors. They sort of go against our previous design guidelines and understanding of what corridors are and how they should function. And so thus other two options are preferable. And it would be some sort of you just have to show it in the drawings and include a note in a submittal. The details, we'll provide those guidance once we have the application materials. Then we'll hone in on exactly how to provide the response and the format of the response. Kirk?
So if you were to propose a building that looked, for example, a lot like the backside of the Oakland Hotel, the historic Oakland Hotel, which doesn't have any of these features, but it's a huge facade, would you have to do the subjective design review?
If it's one of these projects that we went over earlier, you would have to comply with objective design standard. There's no outs. For other projects, if it's, for example, not affordable housing project, not required by local or state programs, then we'll have to explain exactly how this will work, but there will be an opportunity to sort of opt out of ODS by request, and it has to be granted, and then opt into a regular design review.
Okay, well, I have no such project, but thank you.
Thank you. Let's see, Chris?
Yeah, I'd like to just pick up on Kirk's comment concerning the Oakland Hotel. That's a 300-foot frontage that he's referring to. And the thing that makes it really acceptable is that it's got all brick. It's got a cornice line. It's got an articulation at the between the first floor and the upper floors. The windows are arranged in a very orderly, symmetrical pattern. It's a very well-ordered facade, and you don't need breaks when you have that kind of situation. Facade breaks also add costs to buildings, so you're trying to avoid costs. So at the minimum, you should be able to provide an option to these breaks to have facades such as the Oakland Hotel that are well-ordered, windows in regular columns, having really high-quality material like brick. You'll have to define more carefully what you mean by high-quality material, and have a clearly articulated top and bottom. There's arched windows on the ground floor. Now, all of that might be a little challenging to express objectively, but it can be done. The bottom line is, don't just rely on facade breaks to create an acceptable facade. Look at materials, detailing, ornament, and various other factors that you see in traditional buildings. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment, Chris. Yes, I'm hearing that more flexibility is desired. Derek?
Yeah, I'll just agree with Kirk and Chris about ornament and other options for creating a more interesting facade beyond these facade breaks or massing breaks. I think East Bay for Everyone wrote in our letter about specifically allowing some level of ornamentation in lieu of massing breaks, and that has been adopted to the North Berkeley BART ODS standard for that project, so there's a precedent there. So I just encourage you to, as for the reasons articulated before, in terms of interest, but also in terms of cost, make sure that another option is provided.
Thank you, Derek. I'm also seeing a comment in the chat. In a similar vein, in example 1, shading devices are provided. Yeah, you can see those around the street fronting windows here. Could they be in lieu of the massing break? So similar comment. Let's see. And we did and where did the 100 to 300 length come from? 300 is a pretty long facade. Most planning codes. So yeah, it's just to capture kind of the a large block size buildings, so that there isn't, say, a building that is just a box of 300 feet in length without any softening kind of like recesses or other features.
So I think, sorry, just to follow up on that, Larry, is your comment that maybe 300 feet is that the 5 feet wide is not enough of a break essentially in such a large building, and there should something. So maybe you're thinking that maybe that might be 100 to 200 feet, and then once it's larger than that, you might need another break, or what maybe you could expand upon that.
Yeah, can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. as an architect of affordable housing, I'm looking at these standards and I'm going, well, you know, some of the all these numbers that you're throwing at us, you know, X number of feet here or whatever, seem to be pretty subjective in and of themselves. And we haven't really addressed, you know, sort of the context of where this building, or the given building, might be going. You know, what's the general scale and texture of the surrounding area, and how best to, you know, blend in with that. I think that's your goal here. And, you know, just, you guys have chosen, for example, and I think essentially subjectively, that a facade break, you know, a break in the depth of facade is the way to go, and that it needs to be a minimum of 5 feet and 300 feet. And yes, on the one hand, that is an objective standard, but on the other hand, the whole choosing of that standard was pretty subjective. And, you know, from my point of view, especially working on affordable housing like I do, where we're forced by funding requirements to, you know, I mean, a good question is, you know, why do affordable housing projects have sunshades, but luxury market rate housing don't? Because we have to perform up to a higher energy standard. So give me an opportunity to meet your objective standards by doing something that also reduces energy consumption in the building, say by adding sunshades, and that could be substituted for just a one-off, a visual only requirement that you're proposing here.
Thank you, Larry. I see two more hands.
And so I think, you know, make sure obviously to either, you know, we're obviously recording your comments now, but if you want to get into some of those specific suggestions that you might want to elaborate on, certainly I think answering that in the survey or on the online thing would be helpful as well.
Thank you.
Michael? Michael, you're muted.
I wanted to add what Larry said, but also to what Kirk and Chris Buckley said. You know, there are many examples of fairly long buildings without having to make those indentations because of the choice of their materials and other details we might use today, decorative details. I think it's a pejorative term, but there's a richness to the facade that doesn't require this kind of constant articulation of massing. And I'm afraid that part of the motivation that comes from this desire to push and pull and create these breaks is in the modernist vocabulary, we end up with a lot of simple blank boxes that can be pretty boring and bad. And so you're trying to avoid that. But as the others have been pointing out, there are other ways of making a big, long, grand facade quite interesting and attractive without having to get involved with this excessive articulation. And my perception of what's been going on with a number of buildings in town, not only here but elsewhere, is there's excessive articulation that's being forced upon the projects that make them too noisy visually, when they really should be quiet background buildings. Residential buildings are really background buildings. They don't have to always be in the forefront with a lot of busyness. And so I just think we have to be careful that these objective design guidelines don't force a level of busyness that then doesn't challenge the designers to find other ways of making handsome buildings without having to go through all those gyrations.
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, we actually try to be very sensitive to business because we've heard that before as well in the focus groups. But I'll let Derek, is that old hand or new hand? If it's new hand, then you can go.
That's old hand.
Derek. Okay, and then we'll move on to chance, and then we'll move on to the next standard. Just trying to, we have a lot.
Certainly, thank you. Yeah, so I actually wanted to concur with Michael's comments. That wasn't what I had planned to talk about, but I think he is extremely perceptive in pointing out some of the problems here. This particular part of the standards very much reads like a prescription for measures to reduce the perceived visual impact of one very specific construction style that we see demonstrated in some of these images. But there's many options besides that. More broadly, though, one of the things that I do take issue with here is just imposing additional requirements on construction in corridors. I kind of think there should be an overriding principle here to make construction near those corridors as inexpensive, as appealing from a developer perspective as possible, just because those are the locations that the city's relying on to meet its housing element goals. Those are the areas the city's relying on as the most realistic sites for new housing production. So this kind of additional requirement near corridors should be really scrutinized quite heavily, I feel, to make sure that we're not, imposing additional requirements on the sites that were supposed to be the most promising for new housing production.
Thank you for a comment. Okay, so there are no other questions in the chat. So I'll just move on to the next standard. We can always come back if we have time. But the next one, we'll talk about building corners. So the current options for corner articulation for buildings at street intersections, where at least one of the streets is a corridor, shall include at least two of the following features for at least 20% of each building frontage length along the street, but not less than 15 feet, measured from the intersection of the setback lines at the corner. And three options are you either build to minimum setback along both front and corner side of the building, followed by a massing break, depending on the length of the building. Then a corner building mass that is taller than the rest of the building facade along the intersecting streets, again, as allowed by zoning. And a corner building mass that is shorter, minimum of 3 feet shorter than the adjacent building massing on the same development site. So we have more options here. You could provide changes in roof form or breaks in roof line. Habitable projections, such as base above the ground floor area, up to 50% of the building height. Sixth option is window wall systems that are full glass and metal panels at the corners. And another architectural feature, such as a rounded corner or cut corner, tower, cupola, or similar. This is where we allow more flexibility, and the feature shall extend at least half of the building height and shall have a vertical length of at least 50% of the building height situated in any portions of the building corner along the vertical axes. So here's the kind of a full summary of the standard with those labeled images, just for reminder. I know it's a lot to digest. Do people have any reactions now? Yeah, I see one question in the chat. Question is asking, could you speak to the goal of this standard? Internally and externally, when we work on drafting these corners, building corners became very important elements or portions of the building. Corners often serve as landmarks because they're visible from the intersection. They sort of hold the street. And so in a lot of the design guidelines, corners are emphasized and prioritized. So that's the reason we've included the corner standard.
So Kirk, I think, is saying, are you talking about the standard, Kirk, of number 7 is the detailing the curves there's not done well in the way the standard is written?
You're muted, Kirk.
Sorry, no, I'm not well, one question about the standard is, will there be a, probably every single corner shouldn't have these interesting corner things, whatever they are. And another thing about the building number 7, the Baxter, which is very close to me, the detailing is terrible. There's like these crumpled sheets of sheet metal that just, they look really bad. So that's a quality question, but probably the other one is more important. Thank you.
Thank you, Kirk, and everyone. Again, images are for illustrative purposes. We did our best to find something that illustrates a rounded corner in Oakland. So please don't take every image as a literal reflection of a standard. Okay, let's see. No other questions for now. Let's move on to the next standard, unless somebody has something to add. This is in regards to blank walls. All continuous blank walls on the ground floor fronting any public street, sidewalk, walkway, or public open space shall have at least one of the following design treatments. And we do have a definition of blank wall, what consider to be a blank wall. It has to be a portion of a wall that has no windows, no fenestrations. That's at least, I think, 15 feet in length. But you can find those details in the full draft. So option 1, murals that are at least 8 feet in any dimension and cover at least 75% of the blank wall area. Public art that complies with city requirements and cover at least 50% of the blank wall area. Decorative features such as ironwork, grills, panels, mosaics as pictured, or relief sculptures that cover no less than 50% of the blank wall area. Or option 4, planting that covers at least 75% of the blank wall area. And these plants can be permanent vertical trellis and planters in conjunction with planters with climbing plants, or freestanding plant species adjacent to buildings, walls, such as trees or tall shrubs. And if planting is chosen, this option is chosen, then irrigation shall be provided to ensure survival of the plants. I see a comment in the chat from Chance. The major commercial corridors identified in the draft standards are generally higher resourced areas. I'm not suggesting that standards should be lowered for these areas, just that they shouldn't be subject to additional arbitrary standards over and above. Okay. So this is not in relation to blank walls per se, but thank you for your comment, Chance. Let's see, let's go to Christopher and then I'll read the rest of the comments. Christopher, go ahead.
Thank you. One thing I'm missing here, maybe it's the document itself, but there needs to be a definition of how much of a blank wall is subject to these standards. Are we talking about a certain percentage of frontage? Are we talking about a length, let's say 15 feet or longer? That needs to be specified to determine just what triggers these kinds of standards. The next point is, and this is echoing a previous point, so-called blank walls as without windows. If it's an interesting material like brick or true stone, maybe it's less of an issue than if it's, say, just stucco or something that's more undifferentiated. So the material used should be a factor in considering what to do about blank walls. There's also other things you can do. The objective, if it's on a commercial street or heavy pedestrian street, there really should be as much openings as possible. If an opening is not practical, things like spandrel glass could be used. maybe even a promptoid architectural treatment. So those should be additional options for addressing blank walls. Thank you.
Thank you, Christopher. Certainly appreciate additional options that we can consider. Quickly glancing at the chat here, also time check is 6:40, 20 minutes. We still have a lot to cover. So I will read the comments that are specifically related to blank walls.
I think I can quick
Yes.
respond to Larry's comment, I think about so again, these images are so again, the images that were chosen were meant to show a specific objective design standards. That doesn't mean that that image also meets some other standards that may also be in place. So those images are really looking at one specific standard and wasn't looking at the totality of the standards. So obviously when we get a project in, you know, we'll have to look at, does that project meet all the different standards that are applicable?
Thank you, Laura, for that comment. Yes, this applies to all illustrations. Again, selecting images is hard. I see a comment from Michael that, again, in the same vein as Christopher's comment, materials are important. We do have a section on that as well. The mural is the cheapest, so will typically be chosen, but you can't exactly mandate that in the mural actually good. Yes, and so we might be signing up for something we didn't intend. Certainly, I see comment from Connie. If planting is chosen, there needs to be a standard for minimum establishment period for success. I have noticed a lot of planting around new development that are dead or after a year. Yeah, this is why we require irrigation to be installed. And we can add something about maintaining irrigation as well. Thank you. Let's move on to the ground floor because that's a big topic for both commercial and residential ground floor bases. So this first standard will cover both commercial and residential, and then we'll focus on residential and commercial separately in more specific standards. So articulating the base of new buildings and street-facing additions or for more stories in height shall be articulated using at least two of the following options. First option is columns or pilasters that are a maximum of 30 feet on center and project from the street-facing building by at least 6 inches in width and at least 1 foot in width. 6 inches deep and 1 foot in width. Rhythmic pattern of fixed awnings, sunshades, canopies, or screens that are at least 18 inches deep and meet the standards we have in the specific section to awnings. Third option, primary building entrance, such as lobby or shared entrance that meets the primary building entrance for lobby standards. Have additional options here. Fourth is distinct materials from the remainder of the facade. There is minimum 20% of the building area with no change that's less than 3 feet by 10 feet, along with a change in plane of at least 2 inches from the wall surface or the remainder of the building. And final fifth option that applies again to both commercial and residential is cornices, separating the ground floor from floors above for at least 80% of the facade length. I think that's, yeah, those are the 5 options. And again, there'll be more options we can look at for specifically for residential and then for commercial, but curious what people think about this one. I see no hands for now. Please, Kurt, go ahead.
almost everything you're showing is, everything is super rectilinear. And all this stuff, very grid, very, perhaps this could include something about, you know, there could be arches or curves or I don't know what, pointy shapes, as something to make this look better or look different.
Thank you. Yeah, again, we chose existing buildings that were built in Oakland. If you have suggestions for better options to illustrate our standards, I would love to jump on a call with you, Kirk, because we are going to be doing, obviously, aside from the checklist, we'll have an illustrated guide, and this is when images matter. I see Christopher hand went up.
Thank you. I'm hoping I'm not taking up too much of the time here by weighing in so frequently. You've got 5 standards here, and I would argue that standard 4 is maybe the most important, having a distinctive material change from the ground floor to the upper floors. That there's a variety of reasons to do that. It creates a clear architectural break. It articulates the building base, separating it from the shaft and the other floors. The first 3 examples all seem, I can't read the images too well, but it looks like they all have recesses of some kind. There's an arcade there. Well, maybe it's just the first and, well, certainly the first image. The second image, I can't tell for sure. But if you have just, if it's commercial spaces down below, you presumably have big windows, storefront windows. If those are just well detailed with, bulkheads of interesting materials, and a regular, I'm sounding subjective here. Well, regular isn't subjective, but a well ordered, that's subjective, but that can be defined. Design of those windows, that in itself should suffice. You don't need additional articulations. If it is purely residential on the ground floor, you probably want punch out windows, but again, those could just be regularly spaced, surrounded by good materials. You don't need anything further. So again, a wider range of options should be considered depending upon the types of uses on the ground floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Christopher. Let's talk about, Kirk, is this old hand or a new hand? If you allow me, yeah, go ahead. Shall we move on to residential ground floor base, and then maybe we'll have more questions there. So these standards are applicable specifically for ground floor residential, because that's different type of ground floor than commercial. So articulating the base of new building and street-facing additions or of 4 or more stories shall be articulated using at least 2 of the following. Those are bays that are at least 5 feet wide and project from the street-facing buildings by at least 2 feet and not more than 5 feet. Obviously, those need to meet the OCDOT permits. Stoops with covered landings located at maximum distance of 30 feet from each other, and covered and recessed entries that are minimum of 6 feet wide and 6 feet deep. A note here that this option is required if most, more than 50%, existing buildings in the immediate context area, which is defined in the draft, include porches or covered and recessed entries. Again, this standard may not be very popular for, this option may not be very popular for 4 to 8 story buildings, but there might be cases where such building goes into context where front entries, recessed front entries like porches are present. We're still on the standard. Any comments on this? I see a comment in chat from Connie. I would like to see options using historical buildings versus modern buildings. This seems to not work well, especially in architecturally distinct neighborhoods, with the example of Spanish, Art Deco, and other styles. Is this in relation to the ground floor residential, Connie?
She wrote that before on the other.
I see.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for this note. Yes, we'll definitely.
Yeah, and I think there was a comment by Niall about encourage such design standards versus modernizing, gentrifying Eurocentric designs that are not aesthetically pleasing to residents.
Yeah, thank you for this comment. It's very valid. We're obviously with the design guideline, with the design standards, we try not to control style. This is yeah, it's a difficult topic, but thank you for your comment. Kirk, I see your comment. The collection of buildings shown seems to tacitly suggest that buildings should look like the illustrations. These are thousands of vintage buildings that could illustrate concepts. We try to illustrate of what's being built now recently to respond to realities of time. But again, I will accept, anybody's suggestions for good projects that we can feature in our standards. Please send us addresses or names of the projects. We gladly will include those. Thank you.
And I just want to add, really look at what the standard is saying as opposed to what the photo is illustrating. The photo is illustrating one way to do that standard or example of that standard. That doesn't mean that that standard couldn't be used, to also build a building that is more of a certain historic style or so forth. So look at the way the standard is written as opposed to the image. And I think maybe people are getting a little too focused on the example photos, which are just trying to show one example of what that look like from that standard.
Yeah, thank you, Laura. When we review projects, they will be reviewed against what's written. If we will have more graphics later, that will be maybe non-image, non-photos, but for example, some sort of 3D or 2D graphics that will sort of remove a lot of noise. We'll feature those as well as applicable. Tanaya, personally, I'm noticing what is not said. Could you elaborate? I'm not sure what this is in relation to. To the language. Okay.
And I would, I think the intent, right, Ruslan, is that we actually will be doing some illustrations, right, and some drawings to illustrate some of the standards. We do not have those illustrations, those drawings yet. So in the meantime, the intent was to help people have understanding of ways these standards could be achieved by showing some photo examples. So maybe that was a mistake by thinking that something has to look like the photo in order to meet the standard, but that was not the intent. And I think as we actually, create these standards, the intent is to have more drawing illustrations as opposed to photos of specific buildings.
Thank you, Laura. Yes, we actually hired a graphics consultant that will help us in this endeavor this is just what we, this is images for the presentation. They will not necessarily be in the actual objective design standards guide. This is just a presentation deck.
Hi, this is Tunia. You asked me to explain what I was saying. I don't think it sounds like no one's actually saying what they're saying based on pictures, but based on what they really think from reading it, especially given the fact that just from looking at the introductions, I'm probably the least experienced in this meeting right now. But I think it's more along the line of, I know personally, I don't see any language that encourages people to make designs that incorporate the history of a community, or to support or encourage them in doing that and respecting the heritage. We have a lot of very old neighborhoods in this city and very old buildings. And I just would like to see language that supports and encourage people taking that into account in their implementation. And I feel like if we don't say it, they're not going to do it. We're going to just keep getting all these big, expensive, ugly buildings thrown up everywhere that people hate.
Thank you, Tania, for your comment. We feature some of the standards here. It's not full scope of the standards, so I encourage you to also look at the full draft. We do, in the beginning of each section, we actually have at least one standard that requires something of a new development to sort of requires the consistency with the existing neighborhood, whether it's a design feature, or whether it's a massing, or something more specific like a porch. Those requirements already exist in the draft, so I would encourage you to review them as well. But I appreciate your comment. Christopher, maybe a last comment here before we move on. We're only 5 minutes away from, we probably won't be able to go through everything, but if people want to stay past 7, we're certainly happy to accommodate as well. Christopher, please go ahead.
Yes, I'm noticing that we've got only 5 minutes left, and I had a couple of overriding comments and questions, which I'm hoping will be time that go beyond the specific issues that you're showing us. So will there be an opportunity to provide some general overriding comments?
Not related to specific standards.
Applicable to the standards presented and standards not presented, and which should be presented.
I think the best way to do that, since we're trying to do this focused and we only have so much time tonight,
also address some major issues that aren't addressed by any of the standards in the publication.
We do have 2 other documents that are open for comment, right? The full set of standards and the survey as well. That replicates this presentation.
And anyway, I'm hoping there'd be an opportunity to comment generally here, but I will lower my hand. Thank you.
Yes, please comment in the full draft of the ODS. Thank you. Let's talk about the ground floor access a little bit for residential. So if ground floor residential units are fronting corridors where zoning allows dwelling units to be located at the ground floor, these units shall provide one of the following in order of preference. A minimum of 6-foot front setback that extends the entirety of at least first story of each unit, including the entry. In addition, the following transitional features shall be provided in those setback zones: a planting area, which may be a ground level or raised in planters up to 42 inches in height, abutting the sidewalk in at least the first 18 inches of the setback depth, for at least half of the width of each residential unit planted using live plant materials. A low wall, fence, raised planter, or another similar vertical transition feature, again up to 42 inches in height, in combination with planting and a gate, if a direct unit entry is provided. The remainder of the setback area between the street-facing building facade and property line that is not part of the stoop, porch, ramp, pedestrian pathway, or planting area shall be set with decorative paving materials such as pavers, bricks, tile, colored concrete, or other decorative paving material. If the first option, which is A, that's not numbered 1, so sorry about that, is not physically feasible, then the ground floor units shall be elevated between 2.5 and 5 vertical feet above the closest sidewalk level. I'll touch on this right now. This is done because we want to achieve kind of a universal accessibility, and as you know, stoops or any kind of elevated units entries are not accessible. So that's why we're including this not physically feasible other option. And we also have an exception for the designated flood or sea level rise areas. In that case, units can be elevated even higher than 5 feet. Do we have any reactions to these? I know it's a lot to absorb. And if not, I see Hannah. Please go ahead.
Just a quick note on accessibility. If option A is not, or if option 1 is not physically feasible, wouldn't it be more accessible just to not require elevation at all?
Yes, it would. We also wanted to provide flexibility for certain situations. Sometimes there are slope issues and site conditions, so that it's really difficult to provide at-grade entry, and the stoop in some cases need to be provided.
I see. Yeah, just the way it reads now is a stoop is required. It could be that a stoop is optional, or at-grade entry could be allowed.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we can maybe modify the language or make sure that it's more obvious. So we setbacks issue came up in previous conversations. I know it's 7 p.m. So we'll probably stay if whoever is available and can stay longer. We can go through at least a few more standards, but we don't have much more after the standards. We can maybe we should mention the next steps for people who need to jump off. Kelsey, would you like to do that now before we go back to standards for those who can stay?
Sure, absolutely. And for those who can't stay, we are recording this conversation, so we will post it online for you to check out and tune into. But yeah, I think our next steps are just to keep gaining some more input, some feedback. This has been really helpful and informative for us, I know. And there's a couple different avenues that we created for you to be able to provide your comments. There is the full draft, which is on Conveo, which is an interactive site that allows you to just kind of paste little comment bubbles and also respond to other people's comments. It's been really cool tonight to see people in the chat kind of respond and just kind of connect with each other, engage with each other. So you're definitely welcome to do that on the full draft Conveo as well. And then we're also releasing a survey, which is identical to what we reviewed this evening in terms of the standards, as well as the illustrative images. And please, yeah, if you can, keep your mind focused on those standards. And if it's being pulled away by the illustrative images, please know those were only really added as a tool to kind of illustrate what we're speaking about, and not a comprehensive go ahead on this is what we're aiming for. Just kind of wanted to show the different elements between each standard. And yeah, so that survey I just put in the chat. And both items will be open until the end of the day on June 3rd. So please get your comments in. Our Objective Design Standards email is also ods@oaklandca.gov. I just put that in the chat as well. Please email us. I would love, as Ruslan said, to get some example images, reference images from you folks. So yeah, if you have some ideas, please share with us. Like, our lines of communication are open, and we know this is a lot to digest, and we're really looking for your feedback. So stay tuned, and yeah, pass it back to you, Ruslan.
Thank you so much, Kelsey. Yeah, maybe if people could give me like thumbs up if people want to stay or capable of staying. We're obviously here to gather as much of your input as possible. I see a few hands. Great. Well, let's finish the standards and see where we are. And if people need to jump off now, thank you so much for your time. We couldn't ask for a better workshop, and we'll do this again. We also want your comments, more thorough comments. If you have more to say in the standards, as Kelsey described, please look at the chat for the links. So maybe we can go back to the setback treatments for ground floor residential. Those include standards focused on how setbacks facing public spaces, such as streets or public open space, will create transitions between the public space and residential uses. And as currently drafted, these setbacks will be required to provide one of the following features. And it's either a porch at grade, again, no stoop, with minimum dimensions of 5 feet wide by 3 feet deep, or low walls or fences and gates that are maximum of 3.5 feet tall when provided. And if the wall is proposed, it must be set back by a minimum of 2 feet, and that setback shall be planted. And third option, stoops. Again, we're saying here that if the options above, or option 1 and 2 on this slide, are not physically feasible, so a submitter needs to show a hardship and explain why it's not physically feasible, then the stoops are allowed. So it's in similar vein and with Hannah's question. I don't see any hands right now. So the standards cover mixed-use buildings with ground floor commercial. So we have standards for that as well. So options for articulating the base of these buildings and street-facing additions shall be articulated using at least 2 of the following. So option 1 is windows that are larger on the ground floor than windows above the ground floor. Smaller punch-out windows on upper floors that are also meet standards of windows. We have a whole section on that. A horizontal design feature, such as sometimes they're called water table, bailey bands, or a cornice, essentially, that's applied to the transition between the ground floor and the upper floors. This must also meet the ground floor context transition standard. You can see in a full ODS document. And a belt course, or I should say, or a belt course with a change in orientation in material of at least 4 feet in height. Again, attempting to illustrate that how this would look like, but of course the materials could be different, and but the language is 4 feet in height. Yeah, next we have storefront elements, but I just wanted to linger on this if there's any reactions to these three options, two of which would be required. Related to ground floor commercial, of course, storefront elements, we wanted to have a separate section of the standards because of the importance of storefronts. So commercial facades shall provide at least 3 of the following elements of a typical storefront. So all but one of these are required. Transom or clear story window, as highlighted here, that includes a window trim. If transom windows are proposed, they shall be at least 18 inches high. Lintel with piers that connect lintel to the ground for that cohesion of the storefront. Entry bays, which display windows and entry doors that are at least 50% transparent. And where appropriate, to support storefront windows, a bulkhead of at least 6 inches and no more than 24 inches in height, measured from the adjacent sidewalk. Storefront windows shall be set at or within 1 inch of the face of the bulkhead, or the bulkhead material shall be incorporated into the steel detailing. We do also have standards. We do also have material standards in a full draft related to the storefront and the ground floor commercial. Okay, so let's move up to the top section of the buildings and talk about the roofline articulation. Roofs are also important to relate buildings to context, and so roof lines that are longer than 50 feet shall be broken up into sections by using at least one of the following elements or methods. This could be a plane change of at least 5 feet in width. It could be a roofline projection or change in parapet heights of at least 2 feet in height and 5 feet in width. Or provision of other similar type of articulation, such as gable roofs or other similar type of articulation. Again, maybe not as popular for 4 to 8 story buildings, but some 4-story buildings will have roofs that are not flat. So any comments about the roofs and the articulation here? Brian, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I think similar to a lot of the other comments that have been made and on the other topics, this one seems like a sort of mandated busyness, but I'm not sure. If it's maybe a little bit too much, I'm curious if others have thoughts on that. Yeah, 50 feet is relatively frequent.
Yeah, it could be, it could be achieved by like a projection or change in parapet height. So there are options to avoid busyness, but maybe 15 feet. What do people think? Is it too frequent? I mean, depending on size of the building, of course. Christopher.
I agree with Brian. This is, again, mandated busyness. You can look at the back wall of the Oakland Hotel again. There's a kind of pent roof at the top. It's all uniform along the 300 feet. If the design has a good materials, symmetrical composition and other features of traditional buildings, you don't need these articulated roof lines. It's too, having lots of up and down, in and out, it makes the building just call excessive attention to itself. Thank you.
Thank you both, Brian and Christopher. Point taken.
There was also a comment from Connie about incorporating rooftop gardens and how, the current roofline articulation standards may discourage this.
We do have standards, but those are in open space section of the objective design standards for usable rooftops. There are also standards in our code that have to do with that. So I want to say that this is at least partially covered by ODS. Maybe not garden specifically, but shared usable open space on the rooftops that is partially planted and partially something else like seating or play area or exercise and things like that. Thank you for your question. So roof edges, buildings shall be designed with at least one of the following roofline edge treatments, and we suggest decorative cornice. That is a three-dimensional decorative cornice other than colored stripes or bands, or a sloped roof with overhangs that extend minimum of 12 inches and maximum of 36 inches, including the eave and gutter profile. And again, I'm not saying this image captures this standard greatly. And then the parapet that includes architectural detailing. That is sort of example shown here. Are roof edges also great business? Or Christopher, is it the old hand or new hand? If no, then we can move on.
That's an old hand, but that image is helpful. But let's move on.
Okay. So let's talk about.
Ruslan, I think your mic maybe went out or something.
We lost your audio.
Oh,
he doesn't hear us.
We can't hear you, Ruslan. Oh. See, I'll just try to call.
Yeah, I'm trying to call him too.
Sorry, you can't hear me?
No.
He saw your message.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry, sometimes it happens. So you probably didn't hear anything I just said.
No.
I'll read the standard again if you don't mind, and I'm sorry about that. Sometimes switch from these guys create this. So the project shall match the general orientation, whether it's vertical or horizontal, of the window forms that predominate in the immediate context area, again defined. Example could be if windows of the context buildings have vertical orientation with height greater than width, then the windows of the proposed project shall also have vertical orientation. Again, sort of poor choice of image. Perhaps we just wanted to highlight a few existing buildings with these vertical oriented windows and then show such similar vertically oriented windows in the new building here. Thank you, Kirk. Any comments about this? I see Christopher has his hand up, but maybe we can take this comment together with this next one. Let's do them together because that's also Windows context that says that immediate context area buildings exhibit groupings of windows. The proposed project shall also utilize similar grouping types. such as groupings shall include one of the following, and with a caveat that this standard does not apply to windows in the commercial ground floor. So it could be groups of side-by-side vertically oriented windows that together form a horizontal bank of windows, or square or horizontal or oriented or fixed windows flanked by vertically oriented windows, or other similar type of window groupings that exist in the immediate context area. And image is not provided because that is something we'll require for the applicant to submit after exploring. Okay, now we can. Kirk said you said you have to jump off, so maybe you can go first, or this was old hand.
Yeah, I was going to comment on the first set with the two Victorian houses with this other thing next to it. I mean, I guess just the windows on the new building, just the building is so radically contradictory to its context. I guess the windows help, but yeah, it's hard to digest that one.
Yeah, I agree. It's
so not a great example. On these other images that, I can see the Baxter from my house. This part you show is the best part of the building, which I think is trying too hard to be too many things. But then these vents and all these vents ruin it. So I do have to go, but thank you for
thank you so much.
Oh, bye.
We'll talk to you later. Next was Christopher and then Brian.
Yes, thank you. I think these standards are helpful. I think in general, the diagrams, particularly where you're pointing out vertical versus horizontal articulation is helpful. But I totally agree with Kirk on the new building in the first slide. That illustrates all the things not to do. And one of the things that's notable about that makes that building so intrusive is the excessive number of articulations. There's just too much going on. The building is screaming, "Look at me." It needs to be toned down. So if anything, and it also gets into the larger question of context, which I was hoping to go into in this discussion, but let's keep going. It's good that you're referencing context in windows and also with regard to roofs. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, the standard definitely tries to reference the context and respect that. And Brian, please go ahead.
Yeah, my comments and or questions are about context as well. And I understand that the standard defines that. And it also seems to say that, look around at the surrounding context and whatever is there, kind of replicate it, which kind of assumes that the context is coherent or the same. And as we're trying to create certainty with these standards, I'm wondering how would we apply these if in our immediate context as it's defined, we see many different window shapes and orientations and stuff like that. What is one to do with this standard at that juncture?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for asking that. I encourage you again, go to the full draft that explains the immediate context, but also each standard has flexibility in that, if there's a context in, say, more than 50%, or sometimes we ask more than 60% of the buildings within that context, then, do, vertical orientation of the window. It doesn't have to match, right? It could just be the orientation should be similar, right? But but that doesn't have to match the existing. So there is built-in flexibility for that. And I think
that the main thing really, right, is what it'll talk about if you read the full regulations is that it defines this only applies if there is a context of a certain percentage of the buildings that have this. So if there is not this context, then the standard will not apply.
Gotcha.
Yeah, this standard actually says in a full draft that if there's no context, disregard, it doesn't. So some just kind of general good design for windows. We're requiring, for example, that windows shall be inset from the building facade or exterior window trim by at least 2 inches to create a shadow detail. And when no inset is provided, the exterior window trim shall be a minimum of 3 inches wide and 2 inches thick. Windows may be grouped in banks together if the groupings are recessed at least 2 inches. So, and I think this is the last standard for you tonight. This is about window alignment, which is different from orientation. This is how windows are aligned according to elements on the ground floor or other elements, and it says that minimum 60% of upper floor windows shall be vertically aligned with either a door, windows, or structural element framing a larger opening at the ground level. And that brings us to the end of today's workshop. Of course, happy to take general comments to close out the meeting. Thank you for staying with us past the time. Brian, go ahead, and then Christopher.
Yeah, my general comment, which I started to realize I maybe should have made earlier in the meeting, but I was wanting to let you all get into the standards. So I was at one of the workshops that occurred previously in August of 2023. And I guess I was curious about this whole process. If you could give an example of something or broadly characterize like something that you changed based on the feedback that you provided or that was provided in the previous round. And if you don't have that easily at hand, I would say like maybe you could present that back to people in the future. If you could go and like say, this is what we heard and this is how we had changed things based on, you know, the feedback that was provided.
Yeah, that's a great comment, and we're certainly will do that. I would say in general, without having all the details, we did try to address, so in general, we reduced the number of standards that you're seeing now significantly. We maybe cut them more than in half. There were a lot more standards before. We also tried hard to really avoid this business that was referenced a few times during this meeting. Maybe not enough, but I think if you read the standards closer, there is enough flexibility built in, you know, having one of, you know, several options for massing breaks for a building that's, say, you know, between 100 and 300 feet long. Not that much, but maybe we can add even more flexibility with things like were mentioned, like quality of materials could be in lieu of something else, or not requiring as many roof breaks. So, but compared to what we had before, we've significantly toned down the business. I think struggling to think, Kelsey, help me if something jumps to your mind. What else, what other areas were addressed? We did, let's see, maybe it's helpful for me to look at this slide. Ground floor accessibility standards. We had a lot standards requiring stoops, and we've dialed them down significantly and actually required more at-grade entries based on the comments we've received from people who are concerned about the accessibility. We did include things from other cities as well, or neighboring cities that have adopted standards and have sort of tested them, maybe not as long as we would like, but we looked at standards that were reviewed for Alameda, for example, for other jurisdictions that are a little different from us, you know, including cities in Marin counties and Santa Barbara and Concord and many others. So this result that you see now is a result of a lot of work, also interdepartmental work, coordination with OCDOT, with our planners in development planning and zoning, who review all these projects day to day. So yeah, all this work went into this. Laura, do you want to add anything else?
No, I mean, I see that Christopher has his hand up, but I'd say, I think in general, yeah, there was just a lot of reduced amount of standards, and also trying to reduce some of the prescriptiveness of things in order to try to allow more flexibility, so that the hope and the goal is not to have all the buildings look the same, right? We don't want to have the standards be so prescriptive that every building ends up looking the same, because there's just not that many options. And so that is the goal. So obviously, if we didn't do enough of that, certainly those are comments we want to hear from people. And it does sound like we've been hearing some of that, right? Of maybe some of these busy, there's still too much busyness requirements, and giving some more options of maybe differencing of materials or things that can also illustrate these same standards. And I think also the idea of trying to, in a lot of these, give several options for each standard, right? So that it's not like you only can do it one way. We're trying to give sort of a couple or several different options. But again, certainly I think if people have ideas of additional options that we could add, that can be helpful. I do see Christopher has his hand up.
Thank you for that thorough answer from both of you. Appreciate it.
Christopher, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Couple of general comments. One, I think this draft is a big improvement over what we saw last summer. So thank you very much for doing that. Especially pleased to see a very clear and I think a good definition of context area. So, that's helpful. With regarding context, you do have references to roof context and windows. We think the window one particularly should be beefed up more, but we're surprised that there's nothing about materials. If there's a predominant material within the context area, it would seem that that should be considered. And if you take a look at the 1 and 2 unit design review manual, we thought that that context section would be a good starting point for even 4 to 8 story buildings, and where materials is one of them. Detailing is another one. That can be tricky. Particular details on neighboring buildings. Do you replicate them literally, like Corinthian columns, or do you do it more generally? But I think there's ways to address that through objective language, using factors such as proportion, scale, and relationship to other elements of details, and maybe also picking a reference building that might have a particular design treatment, and using those treatments in quantitative terms, like the depth of a cornice, the projection of a cornice. Use those as the basis for your new design. And then finally, one of our big concerns is avoiding architecturally intrusive, like we're seeing in the middle example here, new buildings within older areas, particularly ASIs, APIs, and really don't see much. There's some. The window column illustration you had toward the end is helpful. The important thing, though, with that, they're not only vertically aligned columns, it's also a symmetrical composition, which is very important, as opposed to an irregular composition. Similarly, aligning the tops of windows and doors so they aren't jumping up and down, back and forth, that it's all uniform and quiet. So we were surprised there weren't more provisions addressing intrusive elements within at least APIs and ASIs, which for those of you who aren't familiar with that jargon, that's areas of primary importance, areas of secondary importance, which are basically areas that are considered historic under city policy. So we'll send some written comments that elaborate further on this. But those, if you have any response to what I just said, particularly the materials context, I'd be interested in hearing it. Thank you.
Thank you, Christopher. Yeah, if you look at materials section, we actually have requirements for high quality materials and not necessarily context related, but we felt like if you require high quality materials, for example, for the ground floor commercial, that are sustainable, that are, durable, then those materials would also work in new buildings in older neighborhoods as well. But we could certainly take a look at the context standards there as well. Well, it's 7:32, and
Can I respond to that? Respond just real quickly. High quality materials aren't necessarily a context material. They're two different things. So I would just emphasize, take a look at the context, and then that provides you your materials. And usually in older neighborhoods, those context materials are also high quality.
I appreciate that. Thank you everyone for joining us and spending almost 2 hours here, and or actually over 2 hours. This recording will be available on the website soon, in the next few days, I think. And again, please look at the links in the chat and provide your written comments to us as well. Have a good night, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.